The night was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping on the roof of the patrol car. The city had gone still after midnight. Most people were asleep. The streets were almost empty, and the few lights that stayed on flickered softly through the drizzle. Officer Daniel sat inside his car, staring at the glowing dashboard. His eyes were heavy, his coffee had gone cold, and his body ached from a long day that seemed to have no end. He rubbed his face and looked at the clock. Only 2 more hours before his shift ended. He was supposed to finish early, but another officer called in sick, and Daniel had to cover. It wasn't unusual. Things like this happened all the time. He sighed and reached for the radio, waiting for another call that might keep him from getting home. The sound came sooner than he expected. Unit 47, report of a suspicious person near Maple and 4th. Female standing outside a closed store. Caller says she's been there for over an hour. Daniel straightened a little, grabbed his jacket and replied, "Copy that. I'm on my way." The rain grew heavier as he started the engine. The wipers squeaked against the windshield, and the glow of streetlights stretched across puddles on the road. He wasn't in the mood for trouble tonight, but duty was duty. A woman standing alone near a shut-down store at this hour? That could mean anything. Someone lost, someone waiting, or someone up to no good. As he pulled onto Maple Street, he slowed down. The area was quiet, too quiet. Most of the shops were closed, their shutters pulled down. A broken streetlight blinked above the sidewalk, giving short flashes of light. And there she was, standing under that light, her coat soaked, her hair clinging to her face. She wasn't moving much, just holding a small purse close to her chest and staring at something on the ground. Daniel parked nearby and stepped out. The rain hit his face, cold and sharp. He pulled his hood up and approached her slowly. "Ma'am?" he called out, raising his voice to be heard over the rain. "Are you all right?" The woman turned her head slightly but didn't answer right away. Her face was pale under the streetlight and her eyes looked tired. She seemed nervous, maybe scared. I said, "Are you all right?" Daniel repeated. "I'm fine," she said quietly. Her voice was calm but tense. "Do you mind telling me what you're doing out here this late?" "I'm waiting for someone," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Who are you waiting for?" he asked, stepping closer. She hesitated, glancing around. "It doesn't matter," she said softly. That answer made Daniel suspicious. He'd dealt with too many people who said things like that before. Sometimes it meant nothing. Sometimes it meant trouble. He tried to sound polite, but his tone carried a hint of authority. "It's not safe to be standing out here alone at this hour, especially in this part of town. I'll need to see some identification." The woman looked down, clutching her purse tighter. "I don't want to show it," Daniel frowned. "Ma'am, I'm asking nicely. Please show me your ID." She took a step back. "You don't understand," she said. "I can't." That was it. The moment his patience began to wear thin. He had been up for more than 14 hours, running on cold coffee and frustration. Her refusal sounded like defiance. In his mind, it wasn't about danger anymore. It was about respect. "Look," he said more firmly, "if you don't have ID, that's fine. But if you refuse to identify yourself, I'll have to take you in for questioning." The woman's eyes widened. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Then help me not make one," Daniel replied. "Let me see your ID." She glanced around as if checking the street. "Please, not here," she said quietly. "Just give me a moment." But Daniel stepped closer, thinking she was stalling. "I'm asking you one last time. Show me your ID." When she turned to walk away, he reached out and grabbed her arm. It wasn't rough, just firm, but the sudden contact made her flinch. "Don't touch me," she said sharply. "Ma'am, stop resisting," he said, his tone rising. "I'm not resisting," she said, pulling back. The sound of rain grew louder around them, and for a moment, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them. A tired cop and a frightened woman caught in a misunderstanding. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, stepping in front of her. "Now," her lips trembled. "You're making a big mistake," she whispered again. "Then explain yourself," Daniel said. "Because right now I see someone refusing to cooperate." She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Something in her eyes looked more like sadness than fear. Daniel didn't notice. He was too caught up in the moment, too used to people lying to him. "Turn around," he said. She did, slowly. The rain ran down her coat, and her hands shook slightly as she raised them. Daniel pulled out his handcuffs, his jaw tight. "You're being detained until we figure out what's going on." "This isn't right," she said softly. But she didn't fight him. As he clicked the cuffs around her wrists, she whispered, "If you knew who I was, you'd never do this." Daniel paused for a second but brushed it off. "Everyone says that," he muttered. He guided her toward his patrol car. She didn't struggle, didn't shout. She just walked quietly beside him. Her calmness unnerved him more than any argument would have. When he opened the back door of the car, she stopped. "Please," she said, "just let me explain before you take me anywhere." Daniel hesitated. Something about her voice, and not desperate, not angry, but controlled, made him look at her differently. The rain glistened on her face, and there was a strange kind of dignity in her expression. Still, he was cautious. "You can explain at the station," he said. She sighed, shaking her head. "Then you'll regret it." He thought she was threatening him. "Are you threatening an officer now?" he snapped. "No," she said quietly. "I'm warning you." That was the last thing she said before he opened the door for her to get in. She lowered her head and slid into the back seat. Daniel shut the door and walked around to the driver's side, his mind racing. Inside the car, the sound of rain on the roof filled the silence. He turned on the heater to keep the windows from fogging up, then reached for his radio. The signal crackled and faded. The storm must have been interfering again. He tried twice, then gave up. He glanced into the rearview mirror. The woman was sitting still, staring out the window. There was no fear in her eyes now, just quiet disappointment. "What's your name?" he asked. "Laura," she said softly. "Last name?" She didn't answer. "Ma'am, I need your full name." She turned to face him slowly. "You'll find out soon enough," she said. Daniel sighed and looked away. Maybe she was unstable, or maybe she was hiding something big. He couldn't tell. He reached for her purse, which had fallen to the floor when he guided her into the car. "I'm going to check your bag," he said. "No," she said suddenly, but it was too late. He unzipped it carefully. Inside were ordinary things. A wallet, a small notebook, keys, and a folded piece of paper. He opened the wallet first. Her driver's license wasn't there, but there was another card, dark blue with a golden badge printed on it. For a second, his brain didn't process what he was seeing. Then it hit him. It wasn't a regular ID, it was a federal identification card. The letters Internal Affairs Division were printed clearly across the top. And the photo, the face staring back, was hers. His hands froze. The rain outside seemed to stop. He looked into the rearview mirror again, and their eyes met. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she looked like she'd been waiting for him to realize. Daniel swallowed hard. "You're with Internal Affairs?" She nodded slowly. "I told you you'd regret this." He opened the door and stepped out into the rain, pacing for a moment before hurrying to the back door to open it. "I'm sorry," he stammered, unlocking the cuffs. "I didn't know. You didn't tell me who you were." She rubbed her wrists and looked at him calmly. "I tried," she said quietly. "You didn't listen." Daniel didn't know what to say. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He'd just detained a federal officer, one who investigated police misconduct. The kind of mistake that could end a career. Agent Bennett, Laura is fine," she interrupted softly. "I'm not here on official duty. I was off the clock." "Then why didn't you just show your ID?" She looked away. "Because I wasn't sure if I could trust you." Her words hit harder than he expected. For a moment, he forgot about the rank difference, the fear of what might happen to him. He just stood there, feeling like he'd failed at something much bigger than a simple encounter. "I thought you were hiding something," he admitted. "I've had too many people lie to me." "I understand," she said. "But sometimes the truth looks suspicious when you're only half paying attention." He nodded slowly, rain dripping from his cap. "I shouldn't have grabbed you." "I'm sorry." She studied him quietly, her expression unreadable. "You were doing your job," she said. "But you stopped seeing me as a person." The words cut deep. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but realized she was right. Somewhere between the rules, the fear, and the long nights, he'd stopped giving people the benefit of the doubt. "I'll file a report about this," Daniel said quietly. "I'll tell them it was my mistake." She shook her head. "No need. I'm not here to ruin your life. You made a mistake, but you also stopped the moment you realized it. That's more than I can say for some." They stood in silence for a while, the rain softening around them. A car passed in the distance, its headlights briefly washing over them before fading. Finally, she said, "There's something else you should know." Daniel frowned. What is it? I wasn't just standing there doing nothing, she said. Someone was following me. I saw him before you arrived. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, which is why I didn't show you my badge immediately. He blinked. Someone was following you? She nodded. Yes, I think he might still be nearby. Daniel's training kicked in again. He scanned the dark street, his hand instinctively going to his holster. But all he saw were shadows. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You didn't give me a chance, she said simply. He exhaled slowly, realizing she was right again. All right, let's get you out of here safely. She looked around carefully. My car is parked 2 blocks down. I just need to make sure he's not still around. Then I'll walk you there, Daniel said. It's the least I can do. She gave a faint smile, the first hint of warmth he'd seen from her. Thank you. They began walking together down the wet sidewalk. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, and the air smelled of wet pavement and cold metal. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was thoughtful, heavy with realization. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about how quickly he'd judged her. How easily he'd let exhaustion and habit cloud his instincts. He'd been trained to look for threats, but not for truth. When they reached the corner, Laura stopped suddenly. There, she whispered, pointing across the street. Under a dim streetlight stood a man in a dark hooded jacket, half hidden behind a parked car. He wasn't moving, just watching. Daniel's pulse quickened. Stay behind me, he said softly, pulling out his flashlight. Laura stayed close but didn't hide. That's him, she said. I recognize the way he stands. Daniel took a slow step forward, shining the light toward the figure. The man shifted and then started to walk away quickly. Police! Daniel shouted. Stop! But the man broke into a run. Daniel started after him, splashing through puddles, his heart racing. Laura followed close behind despite his warning. The chase lasted only a few seconds before the man turned a corner and vanished. They stopped near a narrow alley, both catching their breath. He knows I saw him, Laura said. He won't come back tonight. Daniel nodded, scanning the darkness one last time. Who is he? She hesitated, then said, Someone who used to wear the same badge as you. Daniel stared at her. You mean? Yes, she said quietly. A former officer. I was investigating him. I didn't think he'd track me this far. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. You should have called for backup. I tried, she said. My phone died just before you showed up. He looked down, feeling both regret and gratitude. If he hadn't come by, she might have been in real danger. But instead of helping her right away, he'd made her night worse. I'm sorry, he said again, and this time he meant it differently, not just as a cop, but as a person. Laura gave a small nod. Apology accepted. They walked the rest of the way to her car quietly. The street was calm again, the rain almost gone. When they reached it, she turned to him and said, You have potential, Daniel. But don't let suspicion become your habit. It blinds you. He nodded slowly. I won't forget that. She smiled faintly, opened her car door, and paused before getting in. Be careful who you judge next time. You never know who they really are. Then she got in and drove away, her headlights cutting through the mist until they disappeared around the corner. Daniel stood there for a while, watching the empty street. The sound of the rain had faded completely now, replaced by the faint hum of distant traffic. He felt like something inside him had shifted. The uniform felt heavier than before, not because of guilt, but because of awareness. He got back into his patrol car and sat in silence. The reflection of his badge glimmered faintly in the dashboard light. He thought about the night, about how a single moment of impatience could have changed everything. For the first time in a long while, he realized that being a cop wasn't just about following orders or enforcing laws. It was about understanding people, even when they seemed suspicious or difficult. As he started the engine, he whispered to himself, Listen first, act later. The rain began again, soft and steady, as if the city was washing away the mistakes of the night. And somewhere out there, the woman he had wronged was driving home, probably thinking about the same thing, that sometimes even good people can forget to see the human in front of them. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual, even though he had barely slept. The events from the night before kept replaying in his mind like a loop that refused to stop. The rain, the woman's voice, her calm eyes, and that one sentence. You stopped seeing me as a person. It echoed in his head again and again. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. His small apartment was quiet, just the ticking of the wall clock filling the silence. The city outside was waking up, but Daniel felt stuck in last night. He wanted to believe that what happened was just a misunderstanding, a moment of bad judgment. But deep down he knew it was more than that. He had acted out of assumption, not evidence. And it wasn't the first time he had done it. He opened his phone and looked up her name again, Laura Bennett. The badge number, the agency name, all of it was real. She wasn't pretending or exaggerating. She truly was from Internal Affairs. The irony of it made him sink deeper into his chair. Of all the people he could have confronted that night, it had to be someone who could end his career with one report. He kept expecting a call from the department or an official complaint. But hours passed and nothing came. No message, no suspension notice, just silence. That somehow made it worse. By the afternoon, he couldn't sit still anymore. He decided to head to the precinct early. Maybe she had already spoken to someone there. Maybe his captain knew. When he walked in, everything looked normal. The smell of coffee, the hum of chatter, the usual jokes between tired officers. Nothing seemed different. His partner Roy waved from across the room. "Hey, you look like you haven't slept," Roy said. Daniel gave a weak smile. "Didn't, rough night, yeah? What happened?" Daniel hesitated. He couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. Just a weird call. "Nothing major," Roy shrugged. "Well, the chief wants everyone in briefing in 10. You coming?" Daniel nodded. He grabbed a notepad and headed to the meeting room. During the briefing, the chief talked about the usual: patrol zones, reports, and an update on a recent string of robberies. Nothing was said about him, nothing about internal affairs. For a moment, Daniel thought maybe he was in the clear. But then, as the meeting ended, the chief called out, "Daniel, can I see you in my office for a minute?" Every sound in the room seemed to fade. Daniel followed him quietly, trying to keep his face neutral. Inside, the chief closed the door and gestured for him to sit. "I heard about last night," the chief said calmly. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Sir, the chief raised a hand. Relax, you're not in trouble. She already called me this morning." Daniel blinked. "She did?" "Yeah," the chief said, leaning back in his chair. "Agent Bennett. She told me everything. Said you handled it poorly at first, but corrected yourself right away. She didn't file a complaint. In fact, she commended your conduct after the mistake." Daniel stared at him, confused. What? "She said you owned up to it." "That's rare these days." The chief smiled faintly. "You're lucky she's not the type to ruin someone over a misunderstanding." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'm grateful for that." The chief's tone softened. "She also mentioned something else, that she's working a sensitive investigation. Said she might reach out to you again. So if she does, treat it like an assignment, not a favor. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said quietly. "Good, now go get some rest. You look like you've been hit by a truck." When Daniel stepped out of the office, the tension in his chest finally eased a little. She hadn't ruined him. She hadn't even criticized him publicly. Instead, she had protected him. That surprised him more than anything. For the rest of the day, he kept replaying that thought. She didn't have to forgive me. But she did that night after his shift. He sat in his car outside a small diner, watching the rain begin again. He was about to head home when his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number. He hesitated before answering.
"Hello?"
"Officer Daniel," a familiar voice said. He recognized it immediately. "Agent Bennett?" "Yes," she said. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "No, not at all," he said quickly, sitting up straighter. "Is everything all right?" "I need to talk to you," she said. "In person? It's important." "Of course, where?" She gave him an address, a small cafe near the edge of the city, the kind that stayed open late for night shift workers. "Can you be here in 30 minutes? "I'll be there." He drove through the wet streets, nerves twisting inside him. He didn't know what she wanted. Maybe she changed her mind about letting it go. Or maybe she really did have an investigation. Either way, he couldn't say no. When he reached the cafe, she was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of tea. She wasn't in her professional attire this time. Just a simple sweater and jeans, her hair tied back. Still, she carried that same quiet confidence. He walked over carefully. "Thanks for calling me," he said. Sit, she said with a small smile. You look less tense than last night. I feel more nervous now, he admitted. I'm not here to scold you, she said softly. Actually, I could use your help. That caught him off guard. My help? Yes. She leaned forward a little. You remember the man who was following me last night? He nodded. The one in the hood. I've been trying to identify him. I know who he used to be. A former officer named Reed. He left the force 2 years ago after a corruption case. But recently there have been signs he's back in town, trying to cover his tracks. Daniel frowned. And you think he's watching you? I don't think, she said. I know. He could tell by the seriousness in her eyes that she wasn't exaggerating. I can't go through the regular channels yet, she continued. This might involve people still on the inside. I need someone I can trust. Why me? Daniel asked. After what happened, I'm the last person you should trust. She shook her head. That's exactly why I do. You made a mistake, but you owned it. People who can admit they're wrong are the ones who can be trusted when things get serious. He looked down, unsure what to say. What do you need me to do? For now, just help me keep an eye out, she said. If Reed's still around, he won't stop until he's sure I'm off his trail. I might need backup if things get risky. Daniel nodded slowly. I'll do it, she smiled faintly. Good. Then we'll start tomorrow night. Over the next few days, Daniel and Laura worked quietly together. She gave him pieces of information, places where Reed had been seen, contacts who might know something, and records that didn't match up. It wasn't official police work. It was careful observation, patience, and intuition. They met after hours, sometimes in her car, sometimes at the cafe. Daniel started to notice the way she studied every detail, how she could read people just by their tone or body language. She wasn't just an investigator. She was someone who understood human behavior deeply. One evening, as they sat parked near an old warehouse district, Daniel asked, "Why are you doing this alone? You could have gone to the department." She stared out the windshield, her expression thoughtful. Because I've learned that sometimes the danger doesn't come from the outside. It comes from the people who wear the same badge. Her words hung heavy in the air. Daniel didn't push further. He knew that truth all too well. Corruption didn't always look like a villain. Sometimes it looked like a friend, a partner, or a smiling superior. A few nights later, they got a lead. A local mechanic had seen Reed's car parked near an abandoned lot at the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was something. They went there together, driving with their headlights off until they were close. The lot was silent, filled with shadows and the smell of damp metal. That's his car, Laura whispered, pointing. Daniel squinted. A dark sedan sat parked near an old storage shed. The license plate matched the one she had shown him earlier. Stay here, he said instinctively, reaching for his flashlight. She gave him a look. You know I won't, he sighed. All right, but stay close. They moved quietly, their footsteps crunching on gravel. The night air was thick with tension. Daniel's pulse quickened as they neared the car. It was empty, but the driver's door was unlocked. Someone's been here recently, he murmured. Before they could investigate further, a noise came from inside the shed, a faint thud, like a door closing. Daniel motioned for her to stay back and crept closer. The door was slightly open. He pushed it gently and peeked inside. The shed was dark except for a small lamp flickering on a table. Papers were scattered everywhere. Maps, photos, notes. On one of them, he saw Laura's picture circled in red ink. He froze. He's been tracking you, he whispered. She stepped inside beside him and looked at the wall. There were records pinned up. Documents about old cases, names of officers, even evidence numbers. Reed wasn't just hiding. He was planning something. Suddenly, a sound echoed from behind them, a crunch of gravel. Daniel turned quickly, flashlight up, but the door slammed shut before he could react. Daniel, Laura shouted. He pushed against the door, but it was locked from the outside. They were trapped. Stay calm, he said, checking the walls. We'll find another way out. There was a small window high up on one side, barely large enough to fit through. Daniel dragged a crate underneath it and climbed up. He managed to force it open and look outside. He couldn't see anyone, but he could hear footsteps fading away. Whoever locked them in didn't want them dead, not yet. They climbed out one by one and hurried back to their car. Daniel grabbed the radio to call for backup, but before he could speak, Laura stopped him. Don't, she said sharply. Why not? If we call it in, it'll go through dispatch. If someone inside is working with him, they'll know where we are." He hesitated, realizing she was right. "Then what do we do?" "We wait," she said. "We gather proof first, then we bring it all in at once." Daniel nodded slowly. "You've been through this before, haven't you?" She gave a small, tired smile. "More times than I'd like." They sat in the car for a while, the silence filled only by the soft hum of the engine. Outside, the city lights glowed faintly through the fog. Daniel finally said, "You know, when I first saw you that night, I thought you were just another person trying to hide something. Turns out you were hiding the truth from people who should have protected you." Laura looked at him and said softly, "We all wear masks sometimes. The problem is when we forget why we put them on." He nodded, understanding more now than he ever had before. They decided to meet again the next evening to plan their next move. As Daniel drove home, he couldn't stop thinking about how much had changed in just a few days. The woman he had once handcuffed was now someone he respected deeply, someone he wanted to protect. When he finally reached home, the rain began again, soft and steady, like a reminder of that first night. He stood by the window, watching it fall, and thought about what she had said. He had spent years trying to prove he was a good cop. But maybe being good wasn't about being perfect or following rules blindly. Maybe it was about learning, listening, and doing the right thing even when it wasn't easy. Somewhere out there, Laura was still awake too, probably sorting through evidence, connecting dots that others ignored. And Daniel knew that the next part of this journey would be harder. But for the first time, he felt ready. The city lights shimmered against the wet streets, and he whispered to himself, "Next time I'll listen first, of course." Here is on part 3 of the story, written in Nagar simple English natural human tone, and structured to keep the audience fully engaged throughout. The narration flows like a real event and avoids any language that would violate YouTube policies or sound robotic. The patrol car was quiet as the city lights passed by outside. The sound of the windshield wipers slowly clearing the rain was the only thing breaking the silence. Inside, Daniel felt the weight of everything he had just done. His hands were still slightly cold from the moment he realized who the woman really was. He had never imagined being in a situation like this. She sat in the passenger seat, calm, looking out the window, not saying much. The tension between them was thick but not loud. It was the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. He wanted to say something, maybe explain himself, maybe apologize, but the words just wouldn't form. He wasn't sure if anything he said would even matter at that moment. She didn't look angry. She didn't look scared. She looked disappointed, and that somehow hurt more than if she had yelled at him. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you even know why I was there?" she asked softly. Daniel swallowed hard. "I got a call from dispatch. Suspicious person. I didn't know." His voice trailed off because he didn't know how to finish that sentence. "You didn't know," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. "You didn't know, so you assumed." Her words landed like a weight on his chest. She wasn't yelling, but the truth in her voice cut deeper than any shouting could. He wanted to defend himself, but he knew she was right. He had jumped to conclusions. He saw someone who didn't fit a neat picture in his head, and he acted on that picture, not the person. She leaned back, still watching the dark city through the window. "I wasn't hiding because I was guilty. I was hiding because I was being followed." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Followed?" he asked quickly. "Yes," she said calmly. "For the last few days I've been working on a case involving a man who doesn't want to be found. He knows who I am. I couldn't show my ID out there in the open. If he saw me reveal it, it would blow everything." Daniel blinked, feeling a mix of shock and guilt swirl inside him. He had no idea she was involved in something that dangerous. And here he was, treating her like a random suspect on a rainy night. She turned toward him finally. Her eyes met his. "You didn't even ask me why I was there. You didn't even look at me. You just decided what I was." He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She wasn't wrong. He remembered how he felt when she hesitated to answer. He remembered how quickly he decided she must be lying, and now he sat next to her, realizing how wrong he had been. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered. She didn't smile. She didn't say it was okay. She just gave a small nod as if she heard the words but wasn't sure what to do with them yet. "I don't need you to say sorry," she said after a moment. "I need you to remember this the next time." He nodded, his throat tight. He wouldn't forget this night, not for a long time. As the car rolled past a row of old buildings, she asked him to stop. He pulled over slowly. She pointed toward a small parking lot on the corner. "That's my car," she said. Daniel turned off the engine, but neither of them moved for a moment. The rain had eased up, but the sound of water dripping from the roof of the patrol car filled the air. He finally gathered the courage to ask, "Is the person still following you?" She nodded slightly. "I think so. I saw him a few blocks away. That's why I was standing there. I was trying to figure out if he'd show up." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He scanned the street, looking carefully. It was late, quiet, the kind of quiet that hides more than it reveals. The streetlight flickered on the wet pavement. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then something moved across the road, just a shadow slipping behind a dumpster. "Stay here," he said, reaching for the flashlight on the dashboard. But before he could open the door, she put a hand on his arm. "No," she said firmly. "If it's who I think it is, he won't run from me." He hesitated. She wasn't a rookie. She clearly knew what she was doing. But he couldn't just let her walk into danger. "I'm not letting you go out there alone," he said. She stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then stay close." They both stepped out of the car. The air outside was damp and cold, but Daniel didn't feel it much. His focus narrowed. He could hear the sound of water dripping from the edges of the buildings, and the distant rumble of a bus passing somewhere down the block. The woman moved quietly, confidently, scanning the shadows like someone who had done this 100 times before. Daniel followed, his flashlight cutting through the dark. They walked slowly toward the alley behind the lot. That was when Daniel saw it again, a figure shifting deeper into the darkness, trying not to be seen. His pulse quickened. This wasn't his imagination. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm, no answer. Just silence, then a faint sound of footsteps retreating. She didn't wait. She stepped forward, raising her voice just enough. "I know it's you," she said clearly. "You've been following me for 3 nights. It ends here." Daniel watched as the figure stopped. For a moment no one moved. Then the man stepped slightly into the light. His face was partially hidden under a hood, but even from where Daniel stood he could see the tension in his jaw. He wasn't some random person hanging around. This was someone with a purpose. The woman didn't flinch. "You thought I wouldn't notice," and she said, "You've made it obvious." The man didn't respond, just turned and slipped into the alley. She followed. Daniel hurried after her. The ground was slippery and the narrow passage smelled like wet concrete and old trash. They could hear the man's footsteps just ahead. Then suddenly the sound stopped. Daniel slowed down. The alley opened into a small courtyard between old buildings. It was empty except for a few trash bins and a single broken streetlight. The man was gone. "He's good," Daniel muttered, scanning every corner. "He's scared," she corrected. "That's why he's hiding. He knows I'm close." Daniel felt a strange shift in the moment. Just a little while ago he thought she was the suspicious one. Now he was standing behind her, letting her take the lead. She wasn't just another person on the street. She was someone who had been living in a world he didn't fully understand. They stayed there for a while, listening. But the man didn't come back. The alley was quiet again, almost too quiet. "We should go," she said finally. "He won't risk making a move right now." They walked back to the car slowly. Daniel opened the passenger door for her, and she got in without a word. As he sat behind the wheel, he couldn't shake the image of that shadow disappearing into the dark. It wasn't over. That much he was sure of. She sat quietly, her eyes fixed straight ahead. He wanted to ask more questions, but something in her silence told him to wait. So he started driving again, the patrol car humming softly against the wet road. "You know," she said finally, "the person you saw isn't just anyone. He used to wear the same uniform you do." Daniel turned his head slightly shocked. "You mean?" "Yes," she said flatly. "He's a former cop. He's been under investigation for months. He knows I'm the one building the case against him." Daniel felt the air in the car grow heavier. A former cop. That explained the way the man moved. That explained why she was so careful. "Does anyone else know?" he asked quietly. "Only a few people. That's why I couldn't risk showing my ID out there. He has eyes everywhere." Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A man who once stood for the same badge now following someone in the dark, trying to intimidate her into silence. And Daniel had almost made her the enemy. "I messed up," he said softly. She didn't reply right away. Then she said, "Yes, you did. But that doesn't mean you can't fix it." Her voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either. It was honest. It made him straighten his shoulders a little. "I want to help," he said. She looked at him. Really looked at him this time. "Do you?" she asked. "Because this isn't just about a bad guy. This is someone who knows how cops think. He'll be careful." "I want to help," he repeated firmly. There was a long pause. Then she nodded. "All right. But if you want to help, you need to learn to see beyond the surface. You need to see people, not assumptions." Daniel nodded slowly. That lesson was already carving itself into his mind. The night had started with suspicion. Now it was turning into something far more dangerous and real. They reached a safer street and she asked him to stop again. "I need to pick up some files from my car," she said. He didn't like the idea of her going alone, not after what they'd just seen. "I'll come with you," he said without hesitation. They stepped out into the cool night air again. The rain had finally stopped. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the wet pavement. As she opened her car door, Daniel looked around carefully. The city had quieted down, but he could feel that watchful stillness again, like the darkness itself was paying attention. She opened the glove compartment and pulled out a thick folder. "This is everything I have on him," she said, her voice low. "Names, dates, evidence. He's dangerous because he knows where to hide." Daniel glanced at the file, then at her. "Why me?" he asked. "Why tell me all this?" She closed the folder and looked him straight in the eye. "Because you made a mistake tonight. And you didn't run from it. That means something." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she walked back to the patrol car and he followed. The night wasn't over. They both knew it. The man in the shadows was still out there, watching, waiting. And now Daniel was no longer just a bystander. He was part of it. As he started the engine again, the weight on his chest felt different. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was responsibility. The kind that could change everything. She leaned back in her seat, holding the file on her lap. "He won't stop," she said quietly. "But neither will I." The next morning started with a fog that seemed to hang over the city like a blanket. Daniel hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he kept replaying the night before, the look on her face, the shadow that slipped away into the darkness, and the file she held in her hands. Everything inside him told him that things were about to get worse before they got better. He sat in his car outside the station, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. His badge sat on the dashboard, glinting in the weak morning light. He had worn that badge for years, but for the first time it felt heavy. Not because of what it represented, but because of what he now understood it demanded. He took a deep breath, picked it up, and pinned it back on. He wasn't sure what the day would bring, but he knew he had to face it. Inside the station, things felt normal. Too normal. Officers chatted over coffee, paperwork shuffled on desks, phones rang. The world hadn't changed for them, but it had for him. He walked past a few familiar faces, giving nods here and there. Some greeted him, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed to find her. He checked the main office, then the records room. She wasn't there. Finally, he went down the hall toward the internal affairs section. The door was half open, and inside she was standing in front of a board covered with photos, maps, and notes. She looked focused, her eyes scanning the details like she was piecing together a puzzle no one else could see. When she noticed him, she didn't smile. She just said, "You're early." "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I keep thinking about last night." She turned back to the board. "You should keep thinking about it." "It means it mattered." He stepped closer. On the board were pictures of a man, the same one they had seen in the shadows. His face was clearer now, taken from an old ID photo. His eyes had that sharpness that didn't fade even through paper. There were documents pinned up too, evidence of cases he had worked on before he was dismissed. "This is him?" Daniel asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "His name's Paul Reynolds. Used to be a detective. Got too close to the wrong people and started helping them instead of catching them. When we found out, he disappeared. But before he left, he took things, evidence, files, money. We think he's been selling information ever since." Daniel stared at the photo. "And now he's after you." "He's not just after me," she said. "He's trying to scare me off. If I drop the case, he can keep doing what he's been doing." Daniel felt a slow burn in his chest. He had dealt with criminals before, but this was different. This was one of their own, someone who knew the rules and how to twist them. "What's the plan?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. "You still want to help?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Then you'll need to trust me," she replied. "We're going to draw him out." He frowned slightly. "Draw him out how?" "By making him think he's already won," she said. The plan sounded risky, and Daniel's first instinct was to object, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't reckless and she was prepared. She had probably thought this through long before he even arrived. He just nodded slowly. "All right, tell me what to do." They spent the next few hours preparing. She showed him where the suspect had been seen most often: parking lots, alleys near the station, even the small diner across the street where some officers went after night shifts. "He blends in," she explained. "He knows the rhythm of the place." Daniel helped her go through recent reports, security footage, and patrol routes. Piece by piece, they began to see a pattern. The man wasn't just watching her. He was studying everyone who worked near her. He wanted to know who she trusted. That realization made Daniel's stomach tighten. If the man knew about him, then he was already part of the game. As evening came, the two of them sat in the car outside an old warehouse near the edge of town. The plan was simple: make it look like she was transferring important evidence. If the man was watching, he would follow. If he followed, they could catch him in the act. Daniel didn't like using her as bait, but she insisted it had to be her. "He won't take the risk unless I'm the one he sees," she said. The sky turned dark and a soft drizzle started again. The streetlights buzzed faintly, casting golden circles on the wet pavement. She got out of the car holding a small case that looked official but was empty inside. Daniel stayed back, ready but nervous. His eyes scanned every shadow. Minutes passed. Nothing. Then he saw it. Movement near the corner of the building. A figure stepping out from the dark. It was him. Daniel's pulse jumped. The man moved carefully, watching her from a distance. She kept walking, pretending not to notice. The man followed, staying close to the walls. Daniel waited, his hand near his radio. He didn't want to move too soon. The woman reached the side door of the warehouse. She stopped, pretending to fumble for keys. That was the moment the man made his move, stepping forward fast. But Daniel was faster. "Police! Don't move!" he shouted, stepping out from behind the car. The man froze for half a second, then turned, his eyes sharp and angry. He didn't look surprised to see Daniel, almost like he expected it. That made Daniel's gut tighten even more. The woman turned too, facing him now. "It's over," she said firmly. But the man only smirked. "You think so?" he said, his voice calm, almost cold. "You really don't know who you're dealing with." "Someone who's done running," Daniel said. The man took a slow step back, glancing around. "You think you've got me figured out, but I've been 2 steps ahead of all of you for months." "Not anymore," she said. "We have everything we need." He laughed softly. "You've got nothing." He looked straight at Daniel then. "And you don't even know who to trust." Something about the way he said it made Daniel's heart skip. He looked at her, then back at the man. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. The man just smiled. "You'll find out." Then suddenly he turned and bolted. Daniel ran after him, his boots splashing in the water. The woman followed close behind. The chase cut through the narrow streets behind the warehouse, through puddles and trash bins. The man was fast, but Daniel was fueled by something deeper than adrenaline. He was fueled by the need to make things right. They reached the end of the block where the man tried to jump a fence. Daniel lunged, catching his jacket and pulling him down hard. They both hit the ground, struggling in the mud. The man tried to push away, but Daniel pinned him down, breathing heavily. "It's over," Daniel shouted, locking his hands. "You're done." The woman caught up seconds later, pulling out her badge. She read him his rights calmly, her voice steady. The man didn't fight anymore. He just lay there, breathing hard, staring up at the night sky. His eyes were cold, but there was something else in them. Something that looked like relief. They brought him back to the station. Everything moved quickly after that. Paperwork, statements, evidence collection. Other officers handled most of it, but Daniel and the woman stayed until the end. When it was finally over, the man sat in a holding cell, silent and still. Daniel stood outside the glass, watching him. "You did good," she said quietly behind him. Daniel turned. "So did you. You led him right where we needed him." She gave a small nod. "It's not over yet." There'll be questions, investigations. But the worst part is done. He looked back at the man in the cell. You think he meant what he said? About not knowing who to trust? Her face grew thoughtful. People like him always try to plant doubt. It's how they survive. Don't let it get to you. He nodded, though the words still echoed in his head. He didn't like how the man had looked at him, like he knew something Daniel didn't. But he pushed the thought aside. For now, they had done their job. They left the station together. The air was cool and quiet. The rain had stopped completely. The city lights reflected softly on the wet ground. She stopped by her car and turned to him. You proved something tonight, she said. What's that? He asked. That you can make mistakes and still do the right thing after. Not many people can. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. I guess I had a good example. For the first time, she smiled. A small, tired smile, but real. Get some rest, Daniel. You've earned it. He watched her drive away, the red taillights fading into the distance. The street was quiet again. He took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. The clouds were breaking apart, letting the stars show through. It felt like the city was breathing again after a long night. As he walked back to his car, he couldn't shake one feeling. That this wasn't really over. The man they caught might be behind bars, but his words still lingered like smoke. You don't even know who to trust. Daniel looked around the empty parking lot, his reflection faint in the car window. He wasn't sure what those words meant yet, but he knew one thing. The world wasn't as simple as he once believed. Not everyone wearing a badge was good, and not every suspect was bad. People were complicated, and truth was never as clear as he once thought. He started the engine and drove off slowly, the city lights stretching ahead of him like a path he still had to figure out. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this experience had changed him forever. The next time he faced someone on a dark street, he'd remember her words, see the person, not the picture. And even though the case seemed closed, something inside him whispered that this story wasn't done. Sometimes the hardest part of doing the right thing isn't the danger or the fear. It's facing what the truth shows you about yourself. The days that followed were strangely quiet for Daniel. The man they caught, the one who had haunted those dark streets, was gone now and locked away waiting for trial. The city returned to its regular rhythm, but Daniel didn't. Something inside him had changed, something he couldn't quite explain. He still woke up early, put on his uniform, and went on patrol like always. But the way he looked at people was different. Every face he saw, the shopkeeper opening early, the man sleeping on the bench, the woman walking fast under her umbrella. They weren't just citizens or suspects anymore. They were people with stories he didn't know. He had learned that the hard way. One morning, he was sitting in his patrol car with his coffee, watching the sunrise spread soft light over the buildings. His radio buzzed with the usual chatter, but he wasn't really listening. He kept thinking about her, the woman who had changed everything for him. She had been reassigned soon after the case ended. He hadn't seen her since that last night outside the station, but her words had stayed in his head. You can make mistakes and still do the right thing after. He didn't know if she'd ever truly forgiven him, but he hoped she had. Later that week, as he was finishing a shift, one of the clerks handed him a small envelope. This came for you, the clerk said. Daniel looked at the handwriting. It was neat and sharp. He knew who it was from even before he opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. Officer Daniel, I wanted to thank you for how you handled things that night. I know it wasn't easy to face your mistake, but you did. And that's what makes you different. Many people would have tried to cover it up or blame someone else. You didn't. That's why I wrote a commendation for you. You'll find out soon enough. But I wanted you to hear it from me first. The man we caught is facing multiple charges now. Because of your help, he won't hurt anyone else. But more than that, because of what happened that night, maybe a few other officers will think twice before acting out of fear or pride. Sometimes change starts small. One decision, one person. Take care of yourself out there. And remember, being a good cop isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having the courage to admit them and learn from them. L. Daniel sat there for a long time, reading the letter again and again. It wasn't long or emotional, but it carried more weight than anything he'd received in his whole career. He folded it carefully and placed it in his wallet. He didn't want to forget those words. A few days later, he was called into the captain's office. The captain was a serious man, not known for smiling much, but that day there was something close to pride in his voice. "You've been commended for your honesty and professionalism," he said. "Not every officer would have handled that situation the way you did." Daniel wanted to say it wasn't just him, but he kept quiet. He nodded, accepted the handshake, and left the office feeling humbled. The commendation wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the lesson that came with it. That evening, he drove home with the windows down. The air was cool, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The city looked different in the fading light, softer, almost peaceful. For the first time in weeks, he felt that peace inside too. But life, as he learned, doesn't pause for reflection. A few nights later, he was back on patrol when a call came through, a disturbance in a small park downtown. He responded, expecting it to be the usual argument or noise complaint. When he arrived, 2 young officers were already there, standing near a man sitting on a bench. The man looked tired, clothes dirty, eyes dull. One of the young officers was raising his voice, frustrated. "Sir, I told you to move along." The man didn't respond. He just stared at the ground. Daniel watched from a few feet away, and something inside him stirred. He saw the tension in the officer's shoulders, the same impatience he once felt. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward and placed a hand on the younger officer's arm. "Let me talk to him," he said softly. The younger officer frowned but stepped back. Daniel knelt a little so he could see the man's face. "Hey," he said gently, "what's going on?" "You okay?" The man looked up slowly, eyes red from exhaustion. "I just needed to sit," he said quietly. "My legs hurt." "That's all," Daniel nodded. "You hungry?" The man hesitated, then nodded slightly. Daniel reached into his car and came back with a sandwich from his lunch bag. He handed it over without saying anything. The man stared at it for a moment, then took it with shaky hands. The younger officers watched, silent. Daniel turned to them and said, "Sometimes it's not about making people move. It's about seeing why they're sitting there in the first place." The younger one nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. When they left the park later, Daniel couldn't help but think about how far he'd come from that rainy night. He had gone from judging first and asking later to listening before deciding. The woman from Internal Affairs had taught him something he could never learn from any training manual, that being human came before being right. A few weeks later, a new recruit joined Daniel's precinct. The young man was eager, sharp, and full of energy, the kind that made him want to prove himself. Daniel was assigned to train him. On their first patrol together, the recruit asked, "So what's the most important thing you've learned on the job?" Daniel thought about it for a moment before answering. "Listen before you speak," he said. "Most of the time, people just need to be heard. When you forget that, you stop being a good cop." The recruit nodded as if trying to memorize the words. "Did someone teach you that?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "and it's a lesson I'll never forget." As weeks passed, Daniel noticed something different about himself. He was calmer, more patient, more aware of the people around him. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was understanding. One evening, he drove past the same street where everything had started, the place where he had first seen her standing in the rain. The old convenience store sign still flickered, and the same lamppost still buzzed faintly. He parked for a moment, stepping out into the cool night air. He looked around, remembering how it had felt that night, the confusion, the frustration, the regret. But now, standing there again, he didn't feel those things. He felt grateful. Sometimes life gives you moments that break you just enough to rebuild you differently. That night had been one of those moments. He took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. The stars were faint, hidden behind city light, but they were there. He smiled quietly to himself, got back in his car, and drove away. Months passed and seasons changed. The city kept moving forward just as it always did. But Daniel carried that night with him, not as a mistake, but as a reminder of what it meant to be human. Then one afternoon he received another letter. It was short and unsigned, but he knew who it was from the moment he read it. "You kept your promise. I heard about what you've been doing. I'm proud of you." He didn't need a name to know who had written it. He just smiled and tucked it into the same wallet pocket as the first letter. From that day forward, Daniel made it his quiet mission to pass on the lesson he had learned. He trained new officers not just to enforce the law, but to protect the people. truly protect them. He taught them that authority meant nothing without understanding. Years later, when he looked back on his career, he realized that the night he thought would end it had actually saved it. It had turned him into the kind of officer he always wanted to be, one who could see the world through other people's eyes. And somewhere, he hoped that the woman who had taught him that was still out there, helping others learn the same. That evening, as he locked up his patrol car for the last time before retirement, he felt the same rain starting again, soft and steady, just like that first night. He didn't rush for cover. He just stood there letting the drops hit his face. He whispered quietly, "Thank you." Then he smiled, not because of pride, but because he finally understood something simple. Sometimes the hardest nights are the ones that show you who you really are. And with that, he walked away from the car, the sound of rain following him, carrying a story that had started with a mistake and ended with understanding. Daniel nodded slowly. Then neither will I. The car rolled down the empty street, the city lights reflecting in small puddles on the road. The rain had ended, but the storm had just begun for both of them. This night would mark the beginning of something Daniel never expected. A test not of his strength, but of who he really was when the badge wasn't enough.